Good day. I'm Jim Winship, Senior Diplomatic Correspondent for Diplomatic Connections magazine. We're delighted to have you with us as we speak with Ambassador Jan Matthysen of Belgium. He's recently been posted before Washington in both Ankara and in Bangkok, and now here in Washington. And we're glad to have you with us this morning for our conversation with him. Ambassador, can you tell us a little bit about the development of your diplomatic career? I think people are always interested in career paths.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation. Indeed, the diplomatic career is a fascinating way of life. In fact, a vocation as well. It engulfs your whole life, also your family, and I came into that not because I was born into it, or my family, or that I had any relatives, or even no, I was not familiar with it at all. But it was at the university that some professors. I did a master's in history, political history, and was really trying to convince me to consider that, and it took me a while before I did it. And so Belgium organizes every year the in our country famous diplomatic exam where hundreds of young people are participating. So you go through that selection channel, and then you come in the foreign ministry.
So you spent your whole career in the diplomatic service?
No, I was in fact a college professor teacher in history for the first 10 years. Even.
Ah, yes, I can identify with that. So what have been some of your most appealing or most challenging, I guess is a better word, postings over the years?
Well, I think many career diplomats have their stories, and where in fact, looking back to it, you think, well, I was blessed with extremely interesting or challenging posts. But for example, we were in Berlin. I was the last chargé in our East German embassy to shut the light when in fact the embassy closed down. When the wall was open and Germany reunified, these were historic developments. And after that we went to Belgrade, where I was chargé at our embassy there during the toughest times of the Bosnian wars and the sanctions. It was scary, because I remember phone calls with our people then in Bosnia, our troops in Eastern Slavonia, where in fact you heard the gunshots and the bombing
in the background of the
phone conversations, and there were situations where radicals holding demonstrations in front of the embassy against NATO, where in fact Brussels and Belgium were identified with NATO. So that there you are at the crossroads of political contemporary history. That was fascinating. And then we went to, I came back to the head office where I was heading the NATO department during the Kosovo War, where NATO was bombing in fact Serbia, and it is a human, professional, but also a human experience in fact to be part of a political, diplomatic and military effort to bring peace in a problem where you lived in Belgrade yourself for 3 years. So
exactly.
That was really a particular.
So you've really been present at the emergence and the development of what we call the post-Cold War world at this point.
Immediately, and in that particular case, very directly. And then I went to Turkey. Turkey is fascinating as a for any diplomat to be there. If you just quickly go over the map with the neighbors of Turkey, it is Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, the Kurdish question, the Caucasus with Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, Black Sea,
yes.
energy, current, and then the Cyprus matter, and then on top of all the future of Turkey in the European Union.
Exactly.
Then I was there when Erdogan became prime minister, when the AK party won the elections,
yes.
and the whole identity of Turkey was evolving. So fascinating times.
Let me ask, Ambassador, I know when you were in Turkey, you were also accredited to Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan, yes. And then when you were in Thailand, you were also accredited to Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. What is that like? How does an ambassador, I mean, do you keep a series of top hats and change hats every time you deal with a different country, or how does it work when you're accredited to so many important places?
It is not an optimum solution. It's clear. Belgium has 130 diplomatic and consular career posts abroad, which is a lot for an 11 million
it is indeed.
People country. So we are. It's quite an effort to be present in the world, but you cannot cover all countries, and so you do that with these extended jurisdictions. Well, in reality, it can work well. It depends on the quality of the local network you can establish in the other capital, and so you have to travel there rather frequently, or send people from the embassy over there, and try to establish there a local network.
Yes.
You can have there an honorary consul, you can have business community, local compatriots working there, your NGOs, as it was the case in Southeast Asia, where we have a substantial presence of Belgian development aid, building schools and hospitals and so on. So you are there, although the embassy is there, it is not formally there. And it, of course, it extends personally your range.
Of course.
You go to countries where you have particular focus, but it's of course different than your main accreditation. Yes.
Yes. I wonder, you mentioned Bosnia, you mentioned Cyprus. We've seen these problems of nationalism, if you will, around the world, but particularly around the Mediterranean. And of course, Belgium has its own history of a linguistic divide between the French-speaking in Wallonia and the Dutch-speaking in Flanders. How does that linguistic separation affect your Belgium's politics? How does it affect Belgian diplomacy?
Well, we are a federal state, and we had to reorganize the state during its existence. It was not conceived originally as a federal state, and we had to transform it. And in that transformation, we had political internal frictions and fights, and that is normal, but no bloodshed. So you cannot compare it with other countries where you have ethnic conflict. So that's certainly not the case. And in several situations, I will not name them, but in fact they come within the range as you mentioned it, the Belgian model was studied to see whether it could be used, in fact, and we sent constitutional expert in constitutional law to several areas, trying to contribute to the sophistication of the institutional arrangements you have to make when you have a complex situation.
Well, you anticipated my question, which was going to be, in a sense, what are there lessons to be learned from the ways in which Belgium has handled its division, if you will?
Well, in that respect, I'm very modest, because I think you cannot simply, in fact, use the model of one country and use it in another as such. Maybe you can use experiences and parcels of it, but if you, the Belgian institutional transformation came in a peaceful environment. That we were internally at peace. We did not fight. There were no riots. There was not. It was a political, civilized. That's not always the case in the case you mentioned. And the second point is we could do that in a context where our neighbors were not interfering and they didn't have a stake into that problem. That's also not always the case in these problems, but because you have neighbors. The third point is we are a wealthy country. We were in fact wealthy enough to pay for our internal compromise. So you can find easier an institutional reform if you have a context of economic well-being, where you can, and then in other situations, but not so. We don't have an internal history of violence or a threat, and there was sophistication enough in society to come up with creativity to find the institutional solutions. Plus, this was done in a generation strongly believing in the European future, and so there is a bigger, a bigger structure helping, in fact, to overcome these. So for all these reasons, I think I leave it to the world community to pick and choose from the Belgian model what they want. But we did our best within the country to evolve in an overall peaceful and democratic way.
Yes. Well, again, you provided me a perfect lead-in for the next question, which is Belgium is headquarters for the European Union, and for many of its subsidiary institutions, it's headquarters for the NATO alliance and several other international organizations. How does that large-scale international presence affect your country? Does the international aspect of all of that have an impact on your diplomatic relations?
Yes, of course it has a huge impact. First of all, it is big. We're talking about tens of thousands of people with diplomatic status in our protocol department. The Belgian protocol department holds the biggest numbers of people with expat status in the world. So that is big. Plus, you have to add to that, it's a huge concentration of international lobbyists, thousands of them, plus the biggest community of international journalists. Yes. That is really a community, an expat community in itself. Now, looking back to its development, you could think that it would crush, for example, the housing market.
Yes.
Or that it would have a particular, put a strain on, let's say, police and security, that with all these motorcades for all these heads of state meeting for all these European summits and NATO summits, and that life would be impossible. The opposite is true. I get still positive comments on the housing quality for expats in Brussels. Apparently, the Belgian housing market supplies enough. Don't ask me why that is. There are some theories why that is, but in fact, so we can. And the cultural life, restaurants, the general quality of life is thriving on that basis. And in terms of security, we were spared from major security incidents, and we have quite an established, in fact, way and experience to deal with the immediate security aspects of motorcades and dignitaries being protected and brought to the respective meetings. Oh, that is not perfect, but it works.
Yes.
So this is the practical and immediate aspect of it, and so the population is not really against it, and so I think there is a balance between benefits and costs and burden on one hand. On the other hand, there is also a conviction that Belgium, we are founding fathers of most of the institutions.
Yes.
Among the first in the European Union in its first...
when it was the European community and the common market and all
market, coal and steel, and Benelux and the Western European Union, NATO. So it is part of our conviction. It's not just a coincidence that these institutions are in Brussels. After the Second World War, Belgium really did no longer believe in any possibility to continue the illusion of neutrality as we tried to defend or to stick to it during the 2 world wars. So we strongly believe in multilateral diplomacy. So that there is a strong conviction behind the practical reality that we are. And I think history gives us something in return. Belgium is, in fact, in history known as the battlefield of Europe. It goes back to Waterloo.
I was going to say at least to the Napoleonic Wars. Yeah.
People think that Waterloo is in London, but it's close to Brussels. And even in the writings of Julius Caesar, he mentions the Belgians in his first chapter already, in terms of battling them. And,
yes.
But we have the Flanders Fields, First World War, really the most deadly battlefields were there in Flanders as defining also for our history, and the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes.
We call it La Bataille des Ardennes, the biggest land battle fought by Americans on European soil. It's Battle of the Bulge. It was in Belgian territory. So after all these battles, after being overrun by our neighbors twice in one generation.
Yes.
Shouldn't forget that generation. Those who were teenagers in the First World War raised a family in the 30s and were under German occupation again. They lived it twice.
Yes. Yes.
And we have all in our families, we have stories of Germans, soldiers in your house and people killed and arrested and all this. So we know what it is to be in a European environment that had to change, and so we were one of those pushing really for that very quickly. So it's part of our diplomacy. Another aspect of the Brussels reality as a diplomatic center is that I meet friends everywhere in the world, because so many Americans as diplomats, as military, as officers, served in Brussels. And they come back with a smile when they mention it. It's about Belgian chocolates and beer and restaurants and all this. So it gives us an extra access. The country has friends through that and for its networking. So I think it is a benefit. But it might also be a burden, because when we were the capital of NATO during the Cold War, our population sometimes was a bit wondering where the first attack would come. If you are the headquarters of the alliance, then so don't have to exaggerate that, but it was also
a real perception.
There was a perception that look as well, but.
And I don't mean to make light of that at all, but I think it's a side of it that, again, Americans don't automatically see that both the internationalism of Brussels and at the same time the vulnerability that brought, particularly during the Cold War.
Well, indeed, the Warsaw Pact tanks were at 300 and a bit miles from Brussels, and the Belgian army was holding part of the positions in Germany. That was a very real reality of confrontation. History might maybe bring some nuance into that, but the perception in the population was really And
Right.
that these people, aliens, they lived these wars before that, so they knew what war.
Well, and from a political point of view or a diplomatic one, perception is reality.
Yes.
Let me, following on that line just a little bit, Belgium is both headquarters for NATO and also part of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. There's always discussion of the security architecture of Europe. Can you explain to us a little bit what, because I think again Americans generally familiar with NATO, less familiar with OSCE. How do those two organizations mesh with each other?
Yes, they are beyond compare. NATO is a real alliance. 28 countries linked together on the basis of a treaty with an Article 5, a clear obligation to assist in case of an attack on their territory. So that is an alliance. It is the transatlantic alliance, Canada, United States, and European countries. That is a cornerstone. That is an essential. That is an essential reality for our foreign and security policy. The OSCE is much wider. 56.
I think it's 56. Yes.
Now, this is more a tool, a diplomatic tool, an instrument, in fact, to widen, in fact, the security dialogue and to bring initiatives and activities to life, preventing conflict or doing after a conflict to contribute to the pacification, to restore, in fact, societies, and then again preventing a flare-up, to promote democracy by observing elections, and that's also part of preventing conflict. And so that is a bigger thing, and there wider Europe is has memberships. So these are in fact two totally different institutions. OSCE is far less, in fact, engaging and demanding than NATO does. NATO is an integrated military alliance.
Yes.
That is of totally different nature.
Now, some might say NATO is an integrated military alliance without an enemy. Now, in the sense that the old vision of NATO in the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I remember, we both do, when the debates at NATO were always about whether or not out-of-theater actions should be taken. And now almost all of NATO's actions seem to be out of theater. And I'm just wondering, what do you think the future of NATO is, and looking particularly at the recent events in Libya. I mean, what was it, Operation Unified Protector, that came to the assistance of the uprising in Libya. How do you see NATO evolving at this point?
Thank you for that question. It is NATO did already a lot of that debate, and the debate flared up immediately after the collapse of the Iron Curtain, and where indeed you had to reassess the threat level, and on the European side there was in the population immediately a request for what they call the peace dividend, to say we held out for so many years against the enemy on our continent. Now that threat is no longer there. And so there was, we could withdraw our troops from Germany and reduce drastically the conscripts, for example.
Yes.
It was abolish the system to go for a much smaller army and to transform the army into something else. And then you had the Kosovo war as an example. Look, and the bombing in Serbia,
yes,
and in Bosnia, the Bosnian Serbs, to contain or to stop, in fact, the local development. Now, the future of NATO was immediately under debate in principle, where in fact you had in the wars in Yugoslavia, you had a new challenge. And NATO reviewed its strategic concept, which is in fact the main document describing yes. Its doctrine. And there you have several paragraphs addressing the out-of-theater range and what and why. And so we have now already another version of that strategic concept, and in that you can read that NATO sees indeed as its vocation to create a capability where in fact the security of Europe is at stake, in fact to intervene where it is appropriate in the consensual decision-making yes. processes of NATO. On one hand, you are cautious with that tool. Of course, no politician will use that tool lightly, but it is part of reality. And in Libya, I'm happy you mentioned this the example. Belgium was one of the first to engage, and we had the F-16 bombers flying and being part of the effort without, in fact, restrictions, and politically it was supported by a unanimous support in the Belgian parliament. Although in that year we had a caretaker government, politically not so not so powerful as, but with parliamentary backup we were able to do that. That shows that also on the European side there is willingness to where it is necessary to do what has to be done.
Yes.
And so therefore I'm confident that for the future of NATO that we have to wisely develop further that alliance. And the world remains a challenging place, so it's good that countries not just rely on their values or maybe on their wealth or their moral convictions, but also that they have the capabilities to defend themselves.
Let me take you, in a sense we're going backwards in history, but we've seen the reemergence of President Putin in the Russian Federation, and of course between them the EU and NATO absorbed many of the former satellite nations or former republics of the Soviet Union. How do you see the relationship between Europe, between the EU and Russia as it is newly asserted in some ways?
I think we are in a totally different ballgame than it was before, and Russia has its internal evolution in its society. So they have challenges economically, socially, politically, democratically, maybe the ethnic, religious ethnic problems in South and Central Asia, while also redefining its position in the world with its past and its potential. Also, Russia is an Asian power as well.
Yes.
Bordering China, and so Russia remains a very important reality for us, and I think, and the Europeans in general, we think that gradually and not immediately into perfection with on all levels, there is progress in that relationship. So I'm rather confident that we will, with Russia, make progress.
A significant number of Belgian American communities around the United States, and I wonder how that Belgian heritage in various places around the country actually factors into your role as ambassador, into your diplomacy here.
Well, in fact, the Belgian immigration to the United States is one of the 19th century and up into the 30s of the 20th century mainly, and plus then it's still continuing, but then on an individual basis, systematically. And don't forget that there is still a claim that New York was in fact...
Ambassador, there are a significant number of Belgian American communities around the United States, and I wonder how that Belgian heritage in various places around the country actually factors into your role as ambassador, into your diplomacy here.
Well, in fact, the Belgian immigration to the United States is one of the 19th century and up into the 30s of the 20th century mainly, and plus then it's still continuing, but then on an individual basis, systematically. And don't forget that there is still a claim that New York was in fact founded not by the Dutch, but by a Belgian even before Belgium as a state.
I'll see the Dutch ambassador on Friday. I'll take that up with him.
Yes, so it's an argument we have. So meaning we were also part of the very early immigration coming from the north of France, the Netherlands in the wider sense as the provinces were then, and so many people who you can now identify as Belgians coming already very early years. Now that the immigration of Belgians, once they made their life here, they in fact identified themselves totally with the new world, and so they became very American. Only in rural areas where in fact farm communities migrated together, they kept in fact over generations their identity as Belgian. It could be Flemish or Walloon, continue to speak also the language.
Yes.
I have the impression that in the recent decades, maybe because of the presence of media everywhere, in fact that is now quickly fading out. There was one newspaper in Detroit, remember that, made by Belgians in Flemish, and so they are now trying to survive partially also in English language, because they are losing a bit that thing. And so it's a driving reality. You see it on the family names and so, but they are Americans.
Yes.
And it's not like some countries, they keep almost a constituency. That can be, that's not the case for the Dutch. There is no congressman winning, in fact, because of local support of that group. Another part of migration is sometimes underestimated. Through the port of Antwerp, between the 1880s and 1930, 2.6 million immigrants left and came to Ellis Island. This was one of the major, in fact, shipping lines, the Red Star Line, shipping especially from Central Europe.
Yes.
With famous cases and also tragic cases of people. In fact, the last city they saw on European soil was Antwerp, before they went to Ellis. And so there is a project now to link Ellis Island Museum with a new to build museum in Antwerp. I think it opens next year, commemorating that part of history, linking Belgium to the American immigration. But the actual Belgian reality here is, for example, an economic one. The American companies have huge investments in Belgium.
Yes.
You won't believe me, but if you look at the numbers brought together by scholars now, we see that there is more American investment in Belgium than there is American investment in China plus India combined. And that's
a remarkable figure.
That's remarkably high. The Dutch have even more. But there is a lot of American investment in Western Europe, and it's not something from the past. It's not something from the 50s or the 60s alone. The statistics for 2010 and 2011 are record high. So, meaning that the existing companies are expanding still their investments, and new ones are coming. They create a lot of jobs, but Belgian companies create in the United States more jobs than American companies create jobs in Belgium. So we can proudly say that we have a mature relationship where, in fact, our companies make money on this side of the Atlantic and American companies do it on our side, they have they have to pay high wages and high taxes, but it's worthwhile doing that.
Yes.
It makes economic sense, and it is in sectors where in fact there is future you need skills, like for example research, pharma. That's very strong these recently. So economically we hold our ground. There are good stories to tell, and that is now a main reality. Apart from that, the embassy tries to promote the image of the country in the general perception. We are blessed with, in fact, the circumstance that Belgian beer is now booming in the United States. So
Stella Artois is everywhere.
And beer is one of those products making people smile, at least it's for starts the conversation on that basis, but also chocolates and waffles and the cities of Bruges and all these the wonderful historic and cultural references. All that makes it, for me, plus of course the reality of Brussels as European capital makes it easier, in fact, to promote positive image of the country.
Yes. I want to take you back to a very specific piece of Belgium's history, and that is its relationship with what, even when I was a child, was still the Belgian Congo. Mm-hmm. And Belgium's historic relationship as a colonial power, but then its continuing relationship, especially in recent years, with the DRC's development, even in the face of what has sometimes been chaotic and quite deadly violence in the country.
Yes. Well, it's part of our history, and we deal with that. And I can tell you that in Belgium there is a lot of internal debate, in fact, to work on, in fact, our history that is done by many scholars are studying, journalists are writing about it. The Parliament has worked on it in commissions and still do to go and dig into the how and why and so. And there are good things and there are bad things, sometimes very bad parts of that history, and we can only hope that all countries of the world who have a colonial past will do the same, so that in fact we come to terms with our history. We feel that, and from Kinshasa to Congolese reciprocate very much and ask us to remain involved and to continue, in fact, to interact with them in their sometimes difficult problems. So there is an expertise on the Belgian side about Central Africa,
yes,
about Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi, and that is nowadays helpful.
Yes.
But we modestly are ready to advocate and to interact, to help or to advise in full respect for the sovereignty and the reality of the country. There is development aid, massive in these three countries. Belgium is ranking on top of the international donors. And there is also a presence in terms of advice and skills by so many people who have really an affection for the country and a particular bond with it. So it remains part of our life, and in Kinshasa, the Belgian embassy, it is still a very relevant, important embassy.
Let me ask you, certainly the story that has dominated the American press that involves Europe is the issue of the Eurozone, the future of the Euro, the economic status of various members of the EU, but particularly the issue of how the EU as an organization, how the Eurozone is responding to the crisis that has emerged with public debt in many of the members, particularly Greece and Spain and Italy, but not only those. What do you see as the future of the euro and the eurozone?
Well, I'm confident for that, and with time, the pessimist will say, well, the Europeans did not solve it. The optimist will say, well, the Europeans are keeping it under control and are steady working into the way out, because there is no miracle and immediate solutions. Those who think that this can be done in a second by some bold, I don't know what, they're wrong. These are complicated issues you have to do together, and you have to grow out of that and keep the peace in your societies, keep your potential for growth alive. So that is a complicated issue. The president of the council, Herman Van Rompuy, who happens to be a Belgian, in the new structure after the Lisbon Treaty, I think he plays a pivotal role in organizing this difficult council of 27 heads of state and government, plus the president of the commission. That is a difficult body to bring it to quick and efficient decision making. And so we made, I think, over the last years, a remarkable progress in doing that. And you have the institutional dimensions and the central bank, and so that all that is building up one step after the other. And so I think we will go through that. And yes, Europe will come out of this stronger than we.
Yes. Let me ask, Belgium faces many of the same economic problems that the United States is facing in terms of an aging population, rising costs of pensions and social services and so forth. How is the Belgian government seeking to deal with these kinds of issues?
Well, in fact, the problems are similar sometimes, but there are substantial differences as well. The aging population, our population is growing again. Belgium came from 10 to 11 million. It's growing through immigration, and but also the natality rate is the birth rate is going up a little bit, and we also extend the pension age, so that in fact the population stays at work for longer, which is a necessity to keep the balance in your social systems. The problem of public finances is, I think, under control. The numbers of our government are in GDP, public debt ratio, are within and even below the requirements of the European Union, so diving under the 3%, which is an achievement.
It is indeed.
And is good, so we are there. Unemployment is steady or even a little bit falling, whereas the European unemployment numbers in general tend to be higher because of other criteria being used. So it is not an immediate crisis atmosphere, but it is rather the lack of strong growth, in fact, that makes that, in fact, it takes a longer time to go out of the problem. But the message now, the perception now, is one of stability, and there is room for confidence.
Yes, I have to ask about labor unions. We've just seen the teachers' strike in Chicago and so forth, but Belgium has a long history. I mean, it is a very unionized workforce, and I'm just wondering what the experience, what role unions have really played in Belgium's politics, and do most Belgians see the role of unions as being constructive?
The debate is not held in the same way as in the United States. The unions are a reality, but you have also several unions, and the unions are in a constant dialogue with the employers. So that is that is a social dialogue about how, in fact, labor should be organized in the country. And that was helpful for us to keep the social peace and to let our society develop in a just way, in fact, but totally different than the United States might see it, but workable in a sense. Coming back to my example of American companies employing people in Belgium and expanding their activities, they might argue that it is expensive and rigid and difficult, but they do it because they get something in return. They get highly skilled labor force, they have a stable environment. So apparently there is a value for money into that, although if you look at the numbers, labor costs and so we are quite high.
Yes. Let me ask about, try to wrap up our interview by asking you just one very specific and then a more general question. I do want to ask about Belgium's role in Afghanistan. I think, again, most Americans are not automatically aware of a Belgian presence there. But I wonder how Belgium sees its role in Afghanistan evolving as the United States prepares to withdraw forces by the end of 2014. Do you see a role beyond 2014?
Yes, but first of all, we were there in ISAF from the early stadium until, and we are still there, and for us substantial numbers, that is always beyond 500 soldiers in short rotations. So it's for us, given the size of the army, so it's substantial also in quality. We have an F-16 squadron deployed there. We did until a few months ago, because now they are in rotation, the protection of Kabul airport. We were with the F-16s in Kandahar, we were in Kunduz, so in different areas, with different in different activities. Originally, I think the Belgian population sees that as an act of solidarity with the United States, basically after 9/11.
Yes.
That to say, well, there the country was clear in the expression of solidarity to say, here is an ally, in fact, confronted with an attack in its heart, and so that there is a really plain reason for solidarity. So that's why we are there, and then of course later on you see that there is a broader picture of a need to project stability and to do our part in the collective effort. Beyond that, beyond 14, so we are in the logic as it has been in the NATO summit of Lisbon, and now the one in Chicago reconfirmed that we will continue in the alliance with our efforts, and that beyond 14, so we will do a share in in financing the security over there.
Good. What are some of, as you sit here as ambassador between two very good friends, Belgium and the United States, what are some of the most important issues, if you will, between the United States and Belgium at this point?
Well, there are constantly issues. For me, what is important if I go through, in fact, a range of activities is I want my ministers, my top businessmen, my parliamentarians, and all those who are interacting with American interlocutors, I want to help them to maximize the result of their visits to the United States in the context with Americans. So there is a lot of work to prepare the visits of delegations, to give them the right interlocutors, to brief them and bring them up to the optimum result. This is important for me. The second thing is perceptions about Belgium, so that in fact wherever we can, that decision makers and opinion makers, that they know about the country and that they have the right, in our point of view, that they have the right arguments and reasons why. That is important. Then under the general public also to bring an image about the country useful as a principle. I think there must be a better understanding from people to people, but also useful for as a basis layer for economic, tourist, cultural exchanges. So and also there is the protection of our immediate interests. Mm-hmm. We have individuals, people here, where we provide consular assistance. The United States are under the rule of law, so it's not an arbitrary system, but still a country wants to be able to assist wherever your countrymen are in need of the consular section. Also with those who live here, not as immigrants, but who live here as Belgian expats. They are our consular section and serves as their administrative contact point with the Belgian authorities. Yes. So you want all these aspects of your diplomatic life to be and plus to report back. So our minister, when he goes in his meetings, and all the other ministers as well, whenever they go and they have to debate, participate, let's say on the European level in the decision-making rounds, he has to be well informed. Yes. So we contribute from our point of view. We tap into the general knowledge here available in the State Department, Pentagon, and so that in matters of importance to us, our ministry is as well informed as we can.
A final question, and that is perhaps a bit unfair, but I think useful for all of us, and that is, what are your greatest hopes for your country's future, and what are your greatest fears?
It's difficult to fear without that. I think
concerns, perhaps.
Yes. The country, as I see it, is not fearful. Although, of course, we had reason out of our past to be cautious, and yes, we had our share of wars and problems. No, I'm not thinking in terms of concerns, more in terms of the potential. Yes. I see there is much more potential still in the transatlantic community. If you see that the world is of course developing, and the other, you mentioned Asia at the very beginning of this interview. Asia is a growing reality. Latin America as well, Africa will sooner or later also. So the relative importance of the Atlantic community, the North Atlantic community, will diminish by the growth of all the others. Yes. And that, I think, will bring us more together. There is only a minority of the world population living in free societies with democratic processes, with freedom of speech, and with a free economy. In fact, it's not the majority of the world. And so we have all reasons, in fact, to stick together and to enlarge, in fact, the cooperation and the interaction of the Atlantic. Economically, it makes sense, but also morally, culturally, it makes a lot of sense to continue working on that. And if we do that, I think it's for the benefit of all.
Right. Well, and you make a very good point about the world is changing, and it's not the decline of the West; it is the rise of the West in many ways. Exactly. Well, Ambassador Matthysen, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to visit with us today, and thank you for joining us here at Diplomatic Connections. We hope that you've enjoyed this interview and learned from it, and we hope you'll join us again for future interviews and to look at the interviews that are already available on our website that provide insight into the diplomatic community in Washington and into the connections that make that community real, vibrant, and meaningful. Until next time, I'm Jim Winship for Diplomatic Connections.